Fresh off their first sweep of the year, the Mariners are enjoying a well-deserved off day before taking on the Rockies tomorrow. In the meantime, we're going to answer a few of your questions and explain the issues with OPS as a stat coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Thursday, April 18th, 2024. This is Titan Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. Once again, the Mariners enjoying an off day today, so we're going to answer a few of your questions and also talk a little bit about OPS and why we're not big fans of it, and why there are a lot of issues with it. Like we talked about last week, as a part of, you guys wanted us to explain some terminology on here, dive into some stats a little bit more. So we're going to do that. And we're going to talk about OPS, which is one of the more popular stats in baseball right now. But first, let's start with some questions. We got one here from Kyle, who wants to know who's the current odd man out in the bullpen if/when Matt Brash, Gregory Santos, Cody Bolton, and Colin Snyder return. Colby?
Well, almost certainly Colin Snyder is one of them. I imagine he'll be optioned back down to AAA whenever he's ready to go. Bolton might get added. I assume both of those guys will be back before Brash and Santos. Bolton might get added, at which case I assume they would send down DeGus. But I can't see them choosing Snyder over Miller. We know how much they like Miller, but Miller is apparently without an option remaining. So if they want to send him back down, he's got to clear waivers, and that's a dangerous game. So Brash and Santos, they're at least a couple weeks away still. So, when you get there, you'll see who's available, who's throwing the ball well. But it does feel like at that point they're going to have to make the call on Miller, unfortunately, because they're not DFA they're not moving off of Munoz, Spire, Stanek.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not Saucedo.
No.
And then both and Thornton both are out of options. They do not have an option. So you'd have to, when you look at the three most likely guys to be sent down, both Thornton and Miller, all three of those guys are out of options. So you would have to DFA two of them to make room for Brash and Santos. So, you're kind of in a bit of a pickle here. When you get to this point, it'll be a good problem to have. At that point, assuming that Bolton is up with the club at the time that Brash, who is about a week or so ahead of Santos, last I heard, then you could just send Bolton down to AAA because he does have an option left, and then you add Brash. So it's not until Santos comes back where you kind of have to make this tough decision, and you're almost certainly going to have to DFA one of Miller, both, or Thornton to accommodate Santos, unless somebody gets hurt between now and then. And that's certainly a possibility. And again, this is all assuming that particularly Brash and Santos get back at all. Things are trending in the right direction. The last report we got was very positive, but you never know. We're dealing with, a shoulder thing and an elbow thing. You hope that they get back when they're supposed to, but you have to be prepared for setbacks and, future IL stints and all that stuff. So I do think that Bolton gets added for DeGus. I think this is the order of operations. Bolton gets added for DeGus. Snyder gets optioned to AAA. Miller stays up with the team. Then Brash comes back a little bit later. At that point, then I think they just swap Bolton and Brash. And then when Santos comes back a few weeks after that, then I think probably Miller would be the guy they DFA. But there are a lot of things that could go into this. Is Brian Wu healthy? Because now they might feel better about DFAing somebody like Austin Voth, because Hancock's the 6 now, whereas, right now Voth is kind of the 6. So, I don't think we're going to see any major shakeups until Santos and Brash are back, and at which point Santos is going to take the spot of, in my mind, one of both Thornton or Miller. So I think they'd probably pick Miller. They seem to really like Trent Thornton, but it's going to be one of those three for Santos, and that's really the only player you're in danger of losing from your org. You're not in danger of actually having to make that decision to push somebody out of your org until Santos is back.
Next question here from Keto O'Rourke. What are the most and least sustainable aspects of the play we've seen over the last week or so?
I don't think it's sustainable to ask Mitch Haniger to play every single day. I think you're asking for trouble there. Pitching wise, I think what we've seen now from Gilbert and Miller is that their new pitches that they've added this year, they are legitimate, weapons for them. And there's very little reason to suspect that those pitches are not going to be major league quality going forward. There were questions about the cutter and the splitter, and now we've seen them for about, 4 times through the rotation, and they've both been really good pitches. And Miller has not really dominated with the splitter. It's certainly been a valuable, weapon for him, but it's not like he's posting like 35-40% whiff rates on it or anything like that. It's just a quality major league offering that pairs well with his fastball, both of his fastballs. So I think the new pitches that we're seeing, the value that they're getting out of the cutter and the splitter respectively, I think that's sustainable. The Mariners throwing strikes the way they have, that's largely sustainable. It was the other day it was 35 innings straight without a walk or whatever it was, and that got snapped. But when you look at the Mariners rotation, Kirby throws strikes, Gilbert throws strikes, Miller throws strikes, Castillo throws more than enough strikes. Brian Wu, when he comes back, he throws strikes. So the Mariners not walking guys, particularly in the rotation, that's sustainable. Is it likely that they're going to go an entire series without walking dudes? No, probably not. But, right now I think they're running a sub-2 base on ball per 9 as a staff. That's actually sustainable because that's how they built their rotation is on guys who throw strikes and don't walk you. So I think there are a few, cool little things that we saw in this last 3 days that are pretty sustainable, including some power. We're finally starting to see some home runs, some doubles, a couple triples. Yep. So I do think there are some fun things that we've seen. But yeah, to me, what's most sustainable is the pitching that we've seen over the last few days.
I'll tell you what else is probably sustainable. Games that look a lot more like yesterday than the previous 18 games for Julio.
Yeah.
And then I'll give you one that's not sustainable. Going undefeated while striking out 15 times. But hey, maybe that's the magic number. Maybe that's the key.
Don't challenge them.
maybe you strike out 15 times and you just the baseball gods favor you that day.
Insert GIF of you underestimate my power.
But hey, if you also walk 7 times on a night where you strike out 15 times, that does help counteract that a little bit as well, for sure. But yeah, the other thing too that I would say that should be sustainable, at least in theory, because this is how this roster and specifically this offense was built this offseason, is the walks, is the ability to work counts. Now, look, not every game they're going to see a 35 plus pitch inning like they did both against Montes and Green. I think they also did against Lucas Sims, but just strictly focusing on the starting pitchers and getting guys out early in games. Like, that's not going to happen every time, because even if you have great at bats and great approaches, you still need the other pitcher to struggle a little bit. You still need their command, their control to not be where it needs to be in order for that to happen. You need a little bit of outside help. So that's not sustainable, of course. But again, the ability to draw out at bats and frustrate pitchers, that's what this lineup was built to do, especially with swapping out guys like Eugenio Suarez and Jared Kelenic for guys like Jorge Polanco and Mitch Garver, guys who, strike out around 24-25% of the time, but they also walk 10, 11, 12% of the time. So hopefully this was kind of a glimpse into what this offense is ultimately going to become over the course of this season. And I think they have a good chance to carry that over into Colorado against that Rockies pitching staff. All right, we're going to answer a couple more of your questions in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Policygenius and Monopoly Go. Choosing the right life insurance policy is a very important and overwhelming decision, and you want to be able to feel fully confident making that decision. Now you can with Policygenius, which is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options even offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Plus, your life insurance policy through your work may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policygenius gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team, and there are thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs through Policygenius. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonmlb or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonmlb. I'm a very competitive person, and my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times, but if not, it's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties just like classic Monopoly, but now I can also rob their vaults of riches for myself. And the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. And hey, after you're done watching us, how about you go check out the Locked On NFL Mock Draft? It's a 6-part series that dropped last night. Go check it out. You got analysis from the local Locked On experts, got analysis from the local college football experts, and even the fantasy football angle. Go check it out. All right, so let's get back into your questions here. We got a couple more before we're going to get into our OPS dialogue. Casey wants to know, Clase has looked fine at the plate, but even with him being a switch hitter, why wouldn't you play Raley over Clase versus a lefty?
I don't think the Mariners have any clue what to do with Luke Raley. Basically, the only time they've used him with any regularity is when somebody wasn't available, right? Ty France isn't available, so Raley gets to play in back-to-back days, and then Dom Canzone runs into a wall and he heads to the IL. So Raley gets to play in back-to-back days. And the second they have like any kind of matchup disadvantage, Raley's on the bench and we're not even going to use him late in the game, even though Raley's a better defender than Jonatan Clase. He's a better defender than Mitch Haniger. He has a better chance to help you against righties right now than Clase does. Nope, we're not going to use him. Yeah, I don't know, because we talked about this a lot. There's really zero evidence to suggest that Luke Raley cannot hit left-handed pitching. He did it in the minors. He did it in his brief stint with the Rays last year. There's no evidence to suggest he can. We talked about this when Dom Canzone was here too. Dom Canzone can't hit lefties. Well, why? He crushed them in the minors. He had the same WRC plus last year against lefties as he did righties. And yet everybody's convinced he can hit righties. Like, what's the evidence you have that says that this guy can't hit same-handed pitching?
Right.
And to me, the conclusion I have to draw based on how the Mariners have handled Luke Raley over the first 20 games is that they don't think he's good.
This happens every year, by the way. There's always that one guy that they just don't play enough.
Yep. I mean, it's a pretty consistent thing. Part of it is that we know the Mariners really don't want to carry 4 guys on the bench. If they could do whatever they wanted, they would carry 3 guys on the bench and they would have an extra arm in the bullpen. We know they've said as much. So it just kind of feels
which is so weird too, because Jerry has talked about wanting to rotate guys through the lineup consistently, being a dynamic offense, and then they just don't really do that.
And then that's kind of what we thought they were going to do with Raley and Canzone and Haniger.
Well, when you look at the way that this offense was built in general, like it's built perfectly to rotate guys, right? Especially with the injury concerns of Garver and Haniger and even Ty France to a certain degree.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is that like we've talked about this a lot, and it's just this idea that like, oh, well, you're going to take Mitch Haniger out of the lineup for Luke Raley. for one game a week, yeah, sure, let's do that. And then
Right.
the next day we could take out Dominic Canzone, and the next day
Yeah.
we could take out Garver,
Right,
and then the next
because
day we could take out Julio, and the next day we could take out France.
To go back to Casey's question, right? It doesn't even have to be an either or of Clase or Raley.
Mhm.
You have multiple ways to get Raley into the lineup that doesn't require having to take Clase out of the lineup. You don't have to do that. Like, it could be one of the days you take Clase out of the lineup for the sake of putting Raley in there, but Raley can come in for Ty France like he did a couple of days ago. He can come in for Garver. He can come in for Haniger, etc.
And play center field well enough.
It is very easy to let Luke Raley play 4 times a week. Very, very, very easy.
Without sacrificing more than 2 or 3 plate appearances a week for Garver, Haniger, Canzone, Clase, Julio, France.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to play him for the entire game. If you get into a situation in like the 7th and here comes Josh Hader, like, I guess I'll use Mitch Haniger.
Right.
Wow, that worked out well.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
It's just the only time they've given him any kind of run whatsoever is when they literally haven't had another choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't get it. Because even if you think he can't play, which you clearly did at some point, otherwise you wouldn't have traded for him. But B, like, this is a guy who can run, he can hit for power. I guess he's going to strike out. We know that. You knew that when you acquired him. This is not new information. There's nothing that Raley has shown you that is not anything we didn't already know about the guy. Like, Raley looks exactly like the guy you acquired. I don't get, there's been no big surprises. The numbers aren't what you want them to be, sure, but you know what? Neither are JP Crawford's, neither are Mitch Garver's, neither are, Julio's. Like, sometimes guys don't produce right away, and that doesn't mean you just bench them.
30 plate appearances?
I mean, probably a little bit more.
Now look, that's also compounded by the awful spring that he had as well, which maybe they're putting stock into that.
Like I said, it doesn't have to be, and that's the really frustrating thing with Raley. It doesn't have to be, it's only Raley or Canzone. You have to pick one, and Canzone was swinging the bat better, even though until 3 days before he hit the IL, he wasn't. That's kind of the beauty of Raley, is that he could play all 3 outfield spots, first base and DH. There's 5 opportunities to get him in the lineup once a week at each spot. You should easily be able to get him 3 or 4 starts a week. Easy.
Yeah.
And they're just not doing it yet.
Final question here from Stu, who wants to know, what would Clase need to do to earn a more permanent spot even when Canzone returns? Just keep playing how he is. Well, real quick on that, it might not be an either or between Canzone or Clase, given what we just talked about. It might be, if Clase is producing by the time Canzone's ready to go, they might just DFA Luke Raley.
Yeah, they might. Which, again, it's not the first time, it won't be the last time the Mariners have just kind of done a player dirty by not giving him an opportunity to perform with, their inconsistent play time. But whatever, it certainly doesn't have to be an either or. I suspect it will be because I think Raley's
I would say, like, Canzone, even if we're being optimistic here, it's probably going to be a month and a half. By that point, we'll have a bigger sample size on Raley, theoretically. Mm-hmm. So maybe at that point, it does make more sense to DFA Raley. Maybe he hasn't shown you anything.
Maybe, but you're not going to know that in 6 weeks if he gets 1 start a week. So at some point, you just have to suck it up and give him, 12 starts in 15 days and then just kind of give him a legitimate chance to get into a rhythm. But regardless, there's also other ways Clase could stay on this lineup. Like, you've run Mitch Haniger into the ground and his body finally gives. That's a possibility. What if, Dylan Moore gets hurt or something like there, other guys could get hurt. Other guys could underperform. Maybe Dom Canzone just gets sent down to AAA. Maybe they just like Clase's speed and his pretty much just his speed. His speed.
But what does Clase have to do
to stay?
Yeah,
beyond the injury.
Yeah,
he's got to be a 340 on base guy. I think, like, right around there, like couple, at least 10 points above league average there. He's got to make enough contact that he's not just, we hope he gets on base once a game and then we're okay with that. Like,
right.
He's got to be a legitimate big leaguer. He can't just be like, well, he's holding his own for a 21-year-old. I think he's got to be a legitimate, like, no, this guy is like a big leaguer right now. And Clase, he's off to a pretty good start. He's done at least one thing in every game to kind of help the team win it. But he's got to do that for another 6 weeks at least before we even start talking about this.
And as we talk about with every single rookie, league's going to adjust to him. What's going to be important is how does he adjust back to the league? And can he find success doing that?
I just don't think that there's a path for him to stay on this big league roster if he's just Jose Caballero from last year, because they needed Cabby because they had a black hole at second base.
Right.
It's unlikely we get to a point where the Mariners look at the outfield and they go, oh, well, we have a black hole here, so we'll just keep Clase up.
They might think they do.
They're dumb enough to think Luke Raley sucks after 30 plate appearances, so maybe, but that's at least 6 weeks away, so we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I as much as we've talked about how little they've played Raley, I think we'll have a much more substantial sample size of Raley by the point that Canzone gets back. So again, maybe at that point, you feel a little bit better about moving on from Raley than you do right now. So we are going to talk about OPS in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. Spring training is over and baseball season is in full swing. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your PrizePicks entries. Whether it's strikeouts, RBI, or first inning runs, take your pick of more or less and add them to your PrizePicks entry today. You can also get in on the basketball playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a whole new level during the postseason. Speaking of hoops, I'm taking Domantas Sabonis more than 18.5 points and De'Aaron Fox less than 27.5 points against the Pelicans on Friday. Download PrizePicks today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. So now we are going to be talking a little bit about OPS because you guys have asked us to go over some baseball terminology that we use often on this show and dissect some stats that maybe some of you are not particularly familiar with. And yet, last week we told you guys that we're not big fans of OPS, which has become more popularized, especially for more casual baseball fans over the last, I'd say, 10 or so years. I mentioned last week how, at the Rogers Center up on the big board where they have both lineups listed, they don't even have batting average listed. It's just OPS and then the result of their previous at bat. So, Colby, what is OPS and why do you not like it? Why do we not like it?
Yeah, OPS is very simply on base plus slugging percentage. So literally you just add up the players on base and slugging. Mm-hmm. It gives you this number, and it's kind of become the casual fans' idea of what like analytics are and sabermetrics are. And it's kind of like I know more. I'm just not like a batting average tells me everything guy. I talk about OPS and it's like, I'd rather you talk about batting average, to be quite frank, because the problem with OPS is that it values on base percentage and slugging as equal. And they simply are not. This isn't me saying this is math. Okay. So if you have a problem with this argument, take it up with the people at Harvard who published a paper on this like 25 years ago. And by the way, major league teams have known this for longer than that. But a point of on base percentage is worth 4 points of slugging percentage. So on base is simply just more valuable than slugging. And yet OPS doesn't weigh that. To OPS, those two statistics are the same. Here's a little thought experiment to prove the point. If your baseball team had a 1,000 on base percentage, what is the fewest number of runs they would score in a game? It's the same as the highest. It would be infinite. There is no clock in baseball, right? You can't run down the clock. So if you never make an out, which is what on-base percentage tracks, how often do you make an out? If you never do, you will never not score runs. If you have a 1,000 slugging percentage, what's the fewest amount of runs you can score in a game? 9. Because slugging percentage tracks how many bases each player gets per at bat. So if you have a 500 slug, basically what it's saying is you'll get half a base every time you hit. So if you get 4 at-bats in a game, you slug 500, you got 2 bases, right? So for a team to have a 1,000 slug in an inning, the leadoff guy hits a home run, the next 3 guys make an out. 4 hitters, 4 total bases, 1,000 slug.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The only way that you can score an infinite number of runs using only slugging percentage is if you slug 4,000, which is every single hitter hits a home run every single time. Right?
Mm.
Well, that seems well and good, except consider this. If you hit a home run every single time you come to the plate, guess what your on base percentage is? It's 1,000. On base percentage is significantly more valuable than slugging percentage, and OPS makes them the same. It says that, oh yeah, you just add them together because they're the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we kind of have this idea of, and what you end up with is somebody saying, oh, this guy has a 800 OPS, this guy has a 750 OPS, so the 800 guy must be the better hitter, right? Wrong. He might be, but we don't know, because the simple fact is that a 350 batting average or a 350 on base and a 400 slug is more valuable than a 300 slug and a 500 slug.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the problem with it. It's that it values getting on base, or more appropriately, it values not making an out as much as it does getting bases, getting extra bases per at bat. And we know that's not true, because if you don't make an out, you can score an infinite number of runs. Right. So that's pretty much what it is. It's just that slugging percentage is not equal to on base percentage, and OPS does nothing to weigh the value of those 2 individual stats. It just combines them into one stat. Right. And it doesn't tell you anything about the quality of a player.
Yeah, I mean, like on the high end, like, all right, if someone is OPSing 950 or 1,000 or 1,000 plus, sure, right? All right, that's probably a pretty good player. But when we're
they're also not doing.
When we're trying to have more nuanced discussions about guys that are probably OPSing in the 700 to 900 range, OPS isn't a very valuable stat to truly get down to the root of the argument and determine which player is better, right? Which player helps me more, right? So when we have these discussions, there's especially during the off season, when we talk a lot about player acquisition and who fits best for the Mariners, etc., there's a reason that we don't use OPS really ever on this show. And that's exactly why, because when it gets more down to those nuanced discussions, because everyone knows that Shohei Ohtani is a great hitter. I don't need to look at his OPS to know that. Everyone knows that Julio Rodriguez is a great hitter. We don't need to look at his OPS to know that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. But if I'm trying to look at Jose Caballero and Luke Raley, for example, like, I need more than OPS to tell me the quality of those players. Right. So.
Right. That's why we like WRC Plus, because it weighs each action. So on base percentage in WRC Plus is more valuable than slug, just like a double is more valuable than a single, just like a triple is more valuable than a double, a home run is more valuable than anything else, blah, blah, blah. WRC Plus weighs it. Weighted runs created plus. OPS doesn't weigh anything. It just treats them as equal statistics, and they're not. They're simply not. So that's why we don't like it. That's why we don't use it. And that's why, me personally, I get annoyed when I hear people go on the radio and they talk about, like, oh, well, the Mariners team OPS is only 750. That's pretty bad, right? And it's like, well, they're putting up a 350 on base. No, not necessarily. So it's just, there's so much nuance, and people just, well, this guy's got an 815 OPS and this one's got a 775. So I'd rather have the 815 guy. Like, really? Just based on that one number?
Well, because again, like, slugging percentage could be doing the heavy lifting there. Yeah. Right.
Again, 400 on base and 400 slug is better than 300 on base and 500 slug.
Yeah. A guy could be slugging 550, but he's getting on base at like a 280 clip. Right. So that's the other thing too, is like one stat could be heavily outweighing the other. And so it creates this imbalance. And that's why there's so many flaws with OPS. And look, every stat is flawed. Even WRC Plus is flawed to a degree, right? But there are stats that are less flawed than others that Colby and I more prefer than, than like OPS. We prefer WRC plus over OPS, stuff like that. OPS can just be kind of an indicator to like pique your interest into diving into more of the numbers. That's really how I look at it. Like, all right, I'll notice someone's OPS. Okay, I'll dive deeper into the numbers now.
Right. It's just not a good stat. It's one of the only stats where if you only give me that one stat and you ask me who's a better player, I'm going to tell you I don't know.
Right. And I just think it's silly, especially like ballparks like Rogers Center using that as basically, now look, on the smaller boards, they do have batting average and stuff like that. But on the biggest board in the whole stadium, they only have OPS. Like, at least split it up, right? At least show us just show us a triple slash line. I'm not asking for them to show WRC plus and hard hit rate and exit velocity, etc. I don't need to see all that. Yeah. But just give me the batting average, give me the on-base percentage, give me the slugging percentage. I just want the triple slash line because I can contextualize things a lot better.
Triple slashes are way more informative than OPS ever will be. Mm-hmm. So if you're telling me I can give you the slash line or I can give you the OPS, it's the slash line, and I'll tell you with certainty who's the better player if you give me the slash lines. Who's the better offensive player, at least.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let us know in the comments below, what else do you want us to get into here, whether it be baseball terminology, whether it be advanced stats, etc. Let us know in the comments below, and we'll probably talk about it whenever the Mariners have an off day. That's usually when we're like able to do this. So yeah, so let us know, and we'll probably talk about it at some point. But for now, that is going to do it for our show. And a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dane Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day. We'll see you next time. Peace.